Welcome, everyone. I am Adeshewa Josh, and this is Africa Matters. The United Nations is calling for financial reparations to African descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. But will they hit the call this time? No comprehensive slavery reparations have ever been made to date. The United Nations is urging countries involved in the transatlantic slave trade to pay financial reparations to their African descendants. For more than 400 years, people were taken from several regions of the world across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas and enslaved. The report estimates that up to 30 million people were violently uprooted from Africa for enslavement in the West and the Caribbean. This makes the transatlantic trade the largest and most concentrated deportation of human beings, spanning 4 centuries. The UN says slavery ultimately resulted in the destabilization of Africa's institutions and cultural norms, and that slavery is a violation of international human rights law and, under specific circumstances, a crime against humanity. The report concludes that the greatest barrier to reparations for colonialism and enslavement is the lack of both political will and moral courage by those who continue to reap the benefits. But the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says this has to change.
It is high time that reparatory justice is made a priority to address one of the biggest injustices in human history, and one that continues to negatively impact the daily lives of people of African descent across the globe.
The UN report also highlights the link between the legacies of colonialism, systemic racism, racial discrimination, intolerance, and xenophobia faced by people of African descent today. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa voiced his discontent at the status quo while addressing the United Nations General Assembly in New York.
Centuries after the end of the slave trade, decades after the end of the colonial exploitation of Africa's resources, the people of our continent are once again bearing the cost of industrialization of the North and the development of the wealthy nations of the world. This is a price that the people of Africa are no longer prepared to pay.
Well, let's hear more from Kofi Kwaku. He is a senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. He joins me from Pretoria. Thank you so much for joining us. See, there has been no comprehensive slave reparations to date. What difference could this UN report possibly make right now?
Well, it could make a difference because it brings back on the agenda what many have been asking for a very long time. However, the point to it is to see how really relevant and easy or feasible this is going to be, because it's going to bring back all sorts of memories. This is the 400 years of slavery, in addition to the same neo-colonial slavery that's taking place now. For me, the report is a useful document to really help people understand the nature of the suffering of Africans and Black people in general. And the transatlantic slave trade was really devastating. Its impact are still being felt today. So that's good historically. To pull it right into Africa is good. But I don't know to what extent the UN report tells us how to go about making sure that reparation will take place. Is it going to happen by country, by nation, by the number of the 1.4 billion Africans? That is, at this stage, a very difficult area to look into. And I don't see that taking place in the report so far.
I mean, there are documents like the Caribbean Community document about reparations that talk a little bit about that in detail. But you see, there are people who also argue that, wait a minute, why are we going back? Let's just look ahead. Let's look forward. What do you say to those people with such arguments?
Well, they have some kind of intolerable amnesia, right? I think this is important. We need to recognize the pains. I mean, it's just unbelievable the kind of pain people went through. I mean, the exploitation, the devastation, the generational pain is still being felt today. And so we can't just blankly say, let's forget about it and go forward. However, one thing that's very important is to first recognize it, but also deal with what we're facing today. Today, neo-colonial, even colonial agreement, trade agreements, and relationship between former colonial powers, Europeans, are still just keeping Africans into huge poverty. If you look at the former French colonies, so-called former French colonies, they still have agreements that maintain them into that kind of slavery. We're also seeing today that the kind of debt that Africans are taking, but also other countries, are still keeping Africans in other countries poor. That's the focus we should be having today. And I also say that it is really feels like, it reminds me, reparation reminds me of a very powerful Chinese story called The Beggar with the Golden Bowl. And it's a very small, powerful metaphor that's showing that, if you want to replace the beggar with Africa, is that Africans have the golden bowl in their hands, but they're still begging. And how can we sort of change the mindset to make sure that we use that bowl for us and then move forward? And China has already demonstrated. China is not begging for anything today.
Great. For example, in April, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak refused to apologize for the UK's involvement in slave trade. What does that say about the complexities of reparatory justice?
Well, that means that they don't care. They don't feel that pain. Many of them, in fact, Rishi himself, with his generational parents, Indians have been also sent to the Americas, were also slaves. So if he doesn't feel this generational pain, that's in large part, it's not the problem of other people, it's his problem. However, we can't be waiting for the apologies of most of these people, because largely their apologies won't be even genuine. So the focus, while people are waiting for that, we want to fix what's happening today so that next generation don't feel that same pain again. We want to deal with modern slavery today. That is perhaps the best way to be able to find a way, a reparational justice that could help us. So the energy should be on today, not just begging for apologies and forgiveness, but how can we find economic and political systems that help us to really fix our problems today so that they don't take place again tomorrow?
Well, one of the criticisms of the UN report is that it is so focused on reparatory justices in monetary terms that it ignores other components of what the Caribbean Community CARICOM document was talking about, like public apologies, et cetera, et cetera. I would love to go through the documents, but it's not, I would be taking a lot of time. But basically, these are some of the ways that the CARICOM community has said this all reparatory justice can't really make sense. Public apologies, reparations, debt cancellations, et cetera, et cetera. What will get former colonial empires to pay for the crime meted against people of African descent in their own continent?
Before I get to answer that question, the first thing is that I want to say that psychological pains are difficult to quantify across the board. I mean, there are millions of people who've suffered. Many of them suffered differently. How do we go back and then quantify that into economic terms? I think that's the first difficult thing. And even in psychological terms, they're even difficult to qualify them, because anybody with a suffering, a pain, doesn't, feel, it's so relative and subjective that it's very difficult. But one way to get these crimes to be punished or to be dealt with is for Africans themselves to realize their own power. Their own power in a sense. And that power is that we don't want to suffer again. We need to figure out ways to economically free ourselves from that slavery, because that's where it came from. The psychological pains are linked and associated, deeply associated to economic exploitation. So if we can deal with the economic exploitation now, we could start to recover step by step. But it's going to take years to really make that happen. That's one of the reasons. If we can alleviate the suffering and the extreme poverty, unemployment, difficult situation for Black people today, it is a good step to start with. So reparation should really take into account both the economic sufferings, but also psychological suffering, but with some kind of realism. We can't just be saying, okay, we need to be forgiven. Who's going to be really the person to give, that forgiveness or that sort of sorry statement that's going to have a weight to please all of us? Nobody.
I could have you on the show the whole day because you're just hitting the nail on the head all through. But quickly, let me chip in this question. The president of the Central African Republic pretty much linked the current migration to Europe to the legacy of slavery and colonialism. Do you agree?
I totally agree with it. This is now being in the mindset of most Africans that Europe is doing much better than Africa. And in fact, it is not true. Africa is being made poor by the same colonial countries and nations and neo-colonial agreements, and that must be reversed.
Thank you so much, Kofi Kwaku, a senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much. And still to come here on Africa Matters.
I'm Timothy Obiezu in Nigeria, where a new report shows West African students applying to study in the United States face the highest refusal rates in the world.
I am Isaac Kaleji in Accra with more on how businesses are struggling to remain profitable amid continuous increases in utility tariffs.
Student visa refusal are on the rise for Africans trying to study in the United States. Last year, 70% of applicants from West Africa were refused, making it the highest denial rate in the world, according to a new report by an American higher education research company called Shorelight. Timothy Obiezu speaks to a prospective student who hopes to change his fortunes.
In April, Tochukwu Emmanuel received the news he was hoping for. He'd been awarded a place at a U.S. university after a competitive admissions process. But it hasn't been an easy process since then. The first semester started at the end of August, but he's still waiting for his visa application appointment.
The appointment they gave me was 8 months ahead of my starting time. So it was quite challenging for me. I have to look for emergency visa appointment. Even though I did that, it wasn't granted.
His only option now, he says, is to defer his program by 1 year. And to improve his chances at the consulate, he joined an online support group for African students who discuss common challenges they faced at visa interviews.
Basically, we are a group of students that wants to further in US or travel to US. So likely challenges that has to do with 160, I-20 form, and all that. We talk about that, and then we undergo training on how to attend a visa appointment.
According to a U.S. higher education research company, Shorelight, visa refusals for Africans increased to 54% last year from 44% in 2015. The report says West Africa had the highest refusal rate globally, 71%. The U.S. Embassy officials in Abuja say they have interviewed over 16,000 Nigerian students since May, but they didn't specify how many of them were successful. The report says limited U.S. consular staff, a lack of postgraduate plans, and suitable paperwork supplied by prospective students were the major contributing factors leading to visa denials. But with Southern Africa, for example, having just a 12% refusal rate, some say there's more to the higher figures in West Africa.
It's because of the region these persons are from, not necessarily because of those reasons that we have stated. I think they are more critical on people from this part of the world than people from other part of the world, because we've also dealt with other citizens of other nations. We've applied for them from Nigeria, and it was quite easy.
The U.S. Embassy in Abuja refutes this claim. Every year, thousands of Nigerian students flee what they say are unfavorable conditions back home for better opportunities abroad. Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia are leading destinations.
Nigeria's weak economic outlook has been fueling a mass exodus of citizens who often use education as a gateway.
Educational system isn't helping, so everybody just feels, and especially the young ones, they just feel that the moment you're able to get quality education from another country, first world countries, then you have a brighter future.
Emmanuel, meanwhile, is hoping to impress at his visa interview and grab his future with both hands. Timothy Obiezu, Africa Matters, Abuja, Nigeria.
To Ghana now, which has hiked utility tariffs at least 3 times this year, leaving consumers of electricity and water worried about the high cost of these commodities and its impact on their spending abilities. The country's regulatory body for tariffs says the adjustments are necessary and in the ultimate interest of consumers. Isaac Kalaji reports from Accra.
For the past 8 years, Emmanuel Mreku has run this barber shop in Accra. But this year has been tough. In January, he was paying $25 for electricity, and that's more than doubled to $60 a month. He makes around $120 per month from this shop, but half of that is spent on his electricity bill.
The hike in utility prices is affecting my business a lot. I have to pay my co-worker every month. We all have families to take care of, all from our meager revenue, so the constant price hikes are not good for us.
For bigger businesses like this hotel, the cost of electricity and water cuts deeply into their profits. The owner, Akanyamiche, leads an association of hotel owners who have complained about recent hikes in the price of utilities. He says it is becoming increasingly difficult to remain profitable.
The challenges with all these components coming together to weigh on our cost of operation. And once our cost of operation goes high, there's a certain level where customers are able to bear the rates that we put out there. Okay, so when it is too high, it affects patronage. So you want to be at a level that is attractive.
The utility regulator says currency depreciation, inflation, and the high cost of gas has forced them to approve 3 price hikes in a year.
We look at a number of factors so that at least what customers are paying for at least is prudent enough and can guarantee that service. And the utility is also liquid enough to continue to provide the service. At the consumer end, I think apart from price, the major concern has been quality of service. So we have to also ensure that yes, we are giving you this tariff, but make sure one, the light is on, the tap is flowing. For any reason, if you cannot give them water or light, then give information.
Electricity and water are basic necessities for life. Ghanaians can't afford to go by without them. But contending with continuous price increases is also a challenge. And while service providers equally want fair prices, they are struggling to finance their operations under harsh economic conditions. But some experts say service providers are also struggling with operational losses, and that when these issues are fixed, customers should see prices drop.
Consumers want to see, low cost of electricity. Let's start from the bottom, particularly the distribution leg. If they're able to manage their losses, if they're able to, introduce new technology in their distribution leg, it will be good.
For now, though, people like Emmanuel Mreku have no choice but to continue to contend with price hikes in water and electricity, essential and increasingly expensive commodities that support their daily activities. Isaac Kalaji, Africa Matters, Accra.
The harrowing and oftentimes deadly journey across the Mediterranean, undertaken by hundreds of thousands of migrants, was the focus of attention at the Venice Film Festival this year, after the drama Le Capitone won Best Director and Best Young Actor awards. Bushra Gupta shares more.
The award-winning film Le Capitano is more than fiction. It tells the story of many who make their way from Africa to Europe. The migrant drama scooped 2 prizes at this year's Venice Film Festival for Best Director and Best Young Actor.
This film was born out of the desire to change the point of view. In the West, we're used to seeing images of these boats that arrive, and at times they are rescued, at times not, the numbers of those alive and those dead. In these years, we've got used to the idea that they are only numbers, and we forget that behind these numbers, there are people, there are families, there are dreams, there are souls.
It tells the journey of 2 Senegalese cousins, Seydou and Moussa, played by the first-time actors Seydou Sarr and Mustafa Fall. Sarr is a TikTok star in his native Senegal, and like the character he plays in the film, he has a passion for singing, and a journey took him from Dakar to Italy. The young actor could not hold back his tears when he won.
Truly, it did not feel like that was me. I cried a lot, so much. I was really moved when I saw myself on the screen. It was really something else. But I'm really pleased and really proud.
Afro-European filmmakers have produced many migration dramas, but it's unusual for a white European director to root a migrant story in Africa, like 55-year-old Italian filmmaker Matteo Garrone, who is a 2-time Cannes Jury Prize winner.
Let's say that they never read the script, in the sense that I shot in sequence, and every day we went on set and we told them vocally in Wolof, because Wolof is an oral language. I wrote the screenplay in Italian, and it was translated into French. And then on set, we had a translator who every morning, and you can see the translator here who is here by our side, who told them, like a story, like in ancient times.
In 2022, the International Organization for Migration recorded nearly 3,800 deaths along sea and land routes in the Middle East and North Africa region. But the actual numbers could be much higher than reported.
Crossing the sea isn't the best option, really, but you might have to take that risk in order to achieve your dreams and to have a better life. Seeing as there is no chance to travel legally, it's not the best solution, but in this life, we need to take risks.
Everything in the film is forged in truth, as many continue to risk the dangers of the desert, the horrors of the detention centers, and the perils of the sea, carrying hope of a better life like Captain Seydou. Büşra Göktaş, Africa Matters.
And keeping with this week's topic, we explore Gori Island, a short ferry ride away from Senegal's capital, Dakar. The UNESCO-designated World Heritage Site is known as Memory Island because it was the final exit point for the transatlantic slave trade on Africa's coast. Take a look. And that's our show this week. Kindly share your thoughts and suggestions about the stories you've seen in this episode, or ideas on what you would like us to cover on X, formerly known as Twitter, using the hashtag Africa Matters. Feel free to reach out to me on my personal handle at @adeshowajosh. You can watch this episode and more on YouTube. Just search Africa Matters, TR2 World, and please like, comment, and share. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next week.